Elizabeth Daniels hears for the first time a composition written in memory of her late husband, the artist Peter Daniels, by their friend Geraint Lewis. On the walls hang Peter's final works, which tragically he never saw completed. In 1995, Peter Daniels attended a recital at the Nimbus Foundation Concert Hall in Monmouth. An innovative artist, he had been commissioned to paint the largest murals in Britain to cover the walls.
I guess if Mozart had been alive now, he'd have been using electronic music and everything he could lay his hands on. And in fact, traditionally, all artists have been innovators. Yeah, that's lovely, lovely light. What I'm going to try and do to it now is start to manipulate this image to give it get some new ideas, a fresh look at it. I'm going to change the colour levels. I'll just preview what we've got. Right, and we'll saturate that a bit more and bring those colours up much, much sharper. I've now arrived at a point where you can almost, the original image has almost disappeared, but there's still the framework, the basic shape and forms there. So I'd quite like that as a basic idea. So I'm going to begin to do some drawing from this. I'm deliberately keeping this abstract. The less detail I include in this, the freer I can be as I come to develop the idea, as long as I have the framework there. The sketch now, which I've completed, is a combination of what I've picked up from there, what I retained from the original image, which we saw right at the very beginning, and also what I've put into it because I felt like doing that, because it's what I felt I wanted to do with it. Now, I'm going to put this sketch in the scanner, and we're going to bring it up on the screen. I see this just as a wonderful new facility for me in particular. I can get instant feedback from images I put in, I can manipulate them, I can play with them, that would take me weeks in the studio, but I'd probably never do it. So I'm actually exploring areas which I'd never ever get into otherwise, and I see this not as a creator of art, but as a facilitator for developing art from new ideas and new ways of looking at things, new images.
Little did he know back in 1995 how big a part technology was to play in the completion of his project. Up till then, he had been painting moderately sized canvases, but the new murals were to be on a massive scale. They would cover 1,200 square feet of canvas.
As I'm listening to the music, I'm looking at the walls, thinking about these panels, I can see my work in there and how it's going to change the place. And I wonder how it's going to change the music or the way people enjoy it. It's a whole interplay of ideas, of art forms, all working together. And, I just hope it does work together.
I would have thought that you've got 3 clear canvases. Ooh, I don't know, 340 feet probably, or something like that. I'm not mathematically very terribly good, so I can't work these things out. Well, it was originally thought that this hall might be a centre for all kinds of arts, and that it would be, in many ways, an ideal place for an exhibition of art. Well, Peter Daniels talked to the trustees, and it was decided creative art is what this place is about. Let's not just hang something here that's been already painted, but actually have something painted for these walls and for this space, and it'll be, therefore, a living part of the hall.
It's like having several Christmases and birthdays all rolled into one. I think any artist would be so excited about a project like this. I can't wait to get at it. It's intruding on my thoughts all the time. Whatever I'm doing at the moment, it's always there. It's just a wonderful challenge, a wonderful space, and it's a marvellous opportunity. I just can't wait to do it.
Back at his home in Pembrokeshire, the enormity of the project sank in.
Getting the commission was the easy bit. Now, the problem now is that I've got to start worrying about how the hell I'm going to do it. What I'm physically going to do on the canvas at this time isn't a major concern. I've got to think about how I'm going to do it, where I'm going to do it, what I'm going to do it on, and what I'm going to do it with. because there's no second chance with this one. I either do it right or I don't. And unfortunately, I've got nobody, at least nobody alive, that I can go and talk to who may have done something on a similar scale. It's if you could imagine a double-decker bus tipped on its end and chop the engine off at the top, you've got it pretty well, but the bus is still a bit narrow. So we're looking at something bigger than a double-decker bus on its side 6 times.
There was a definite period after the initial, wow factor of the whole thing, where he had to go inside himself and just think, how am I going to translate the work I'm doing now into something that will look good at that kind of scale? However, Pete was used to kind of withdrawing and waiting for the kind of creative solution to come forward. But I think this was probably the biggest challenge he'd had, really. A bit of a dark night of the soul really going on. And when you are in that dark place, you have to go through the period of, I'm never going to paint another picture again. My creativity has gone. But that had been a usual cycle.
The artist lives on the edge of disaster all the time. And if we're not living on the edge of disaster, the painting isn't working. We're just repeating. And if you've gone over the edge, it's a disaster anyway. But as it is, it's that tension, isn't it? That moment that keeps the artist alive and looking and working.
Peter's plan was to paint the huge panels in oils. Seeking practical help and guidance, he travelled to the home of the Dutch masters, who painted on a similar epic scale. He found solutions at the Amsterdam company which supplied paints for Rembrandt.
I had a marvellous time there, and seeing Rembrandt's bits and pieces, his slab, it really is an extraordinary experience, really. And you think, well, you feel the thread of your own craft, your own art, running back centuries, and there is a feeling of being alive to that. And in particularly what I'm doing, there's that feeling of life in it, that not only me, I'm standing on the shoulders of bloody giants down the centuries. There they are, all these fantastic people we all know about, all these names, the Leonardos, the Rembrandts, the Rubens, and the Van Dycks, and all the rest of them you could possibly think of. I'm standing on their shoulders, and I'm busy. In one way, it's a very humbling thing to think that I'm going to be working on a scale that they worked on, almost an epic scale. You think, wow, this is absolutely phenomenal, And then, on the other hand, in creeps a panic, who the hell am I, to even begin to assume I could follow people like that.
Finding a place big enough to accommodate the 6 huge canvases was next on the agenda, but the sheer physical implications proved daunting.
Well, when Pete took me up to the studio at Carnhedrin, and there were these huge white canvases in a vertical position, and there was one here and there was another one there, and there was Pete in the middle, and there was a slight sense of the matador. How am I going to make the first mark on this incredibly white, pure surface? When
You're too involved with the practicalities of how to do a thing, for a creative personality, that there's also a real frustration going on that I need to get some paint on that canvas. You just got to get in there and paint and everything. And there was a large period of time when that wasn't happening.
I've now got a final date for the installation of these panels, which is the end of summer 98 next year. 15, 16 months or thereabouts away from now. So I've had this year fortunately, to play and experiment. Now, I have to make decisions. I've got to say, right, and I've got to have the confidence to say to myself, this is what I'm going to do, and do it.
At first he was doing smaller works and scaling them up, and that was very successful, and he was finding that very, very kind of creatively stimulating, because he was overcoming one hurdle at a time as he was upping the dimensions of the work that he was using, and then suddenly the energy just began to go, it didn't really strike us as completely unusual. I'd seen these kind of processes, and this went on longer than previously, but then this was an even more extraordinary situation. And you'd think, well, it's part of the process of living, really, and this time we didn't realise, obviously it was part of the process of dying.
In 1997, Peter Daniels was struggling with the practicalities of painting the huge murals, but there was a far bigger unknown battle ahead.
He started to show symptoms of illness at the end of the summer. At night, I suppose, when he was more tired, he would have a lot of convulsions, big twitches and things, and he couldn't sleep. And he had preliminary tests, and it was very strongly suggested that he was an oversensitive artist, that it was psychosomatic, and maybe the fear of doing these panels was creating this imaginary pain in his back. Well, he got very, very depressed. And by Christmas time, things were getting worse and worse and worse. Then these twitches progressed into agonising pain, which I used to think that it was just the most cruel set of symptoms that you could possibly have, because there was absolutely no respite from it at all. The pain meant he had to stand up. The pain increased when he sat or lay down, and he couldn't sleep. And it was just absolutely appalling. But he had enormous courage. He had tests, more and more tests, and it would depress and make anybody despair. But, he was always ready to, damn well, I'll do it if this can bring any kind of hope. He didn't do any artwork at all while he was in such pain. And then he started to lose the use of his legs and become crippled. And one of his vertebrae had collapsed. And then they did a biopsy of the vertebra and found out that it was cancer, which was late June. The pain levels dropped then, because when the bone disintegrates, the pressure has gone, so that the pain levels dropped. And it was a bit like a swan song, because this is when he started to create solutions to how the panels were going to be eventually finished off, since he couldn't physically work on the paintings that he had created, the smaller paintings he'd created. He couldn't physically do the large canvases based on them. And so he then started to think of the solution using the printing technology. He knew which paintings he wanted to develop, and I would push him up into the gallery so he could work on his computer there and do images. It was amazing, that creative urge that was all, given a little bit more energy. It was just there, ready to go forward.
In 1998, computers weren't advanced enough to enable fine artwork to be printed without the colours breaking up. So the initial attempts at large-scale printing of the artwork tended to end up looking like advertising hoardings.
I think Pete had a sixth sense about this kind of thing, and the possibilities always excited him. That here he was again, pushing those frontiers, those possibilities forward, and who knows what would happen.
In August 98, Peter Daniels lost his battle with cancer.
I know everybody else thought that, well, that's an absolute tragedy. Pete's died. The project was at a point where if only it had been that little bit further along, then we could have continued with it. But I think I was in the, you couldn't call it privileged position, but I was in that position where I'd shared that creative insight that Pete had had. And actually I just felt like it was a bit like a relay. I'd been given something that I just had to keep on running the race with.
After his death, computer development caught up with Peter's pioneering vision. Fellow artist and neighbour David Hughes shared his belief in combining art with technology, and with his partner Jane Massore's expertise, decided to see the project through to its conclusion.
It had to be done. We also felt that, Jane and I had the technology to move it forward, and we also thought we'd be mad to take it on. But we wanted to do it for Pete and we wanted to do it for Elizabeth, because he'd already said to us on many occasions that this was, something which would be a memorial to him. It would be a big statement for his work, and he was absolutely right. So having done the work himself, even though it was at a smaller scale, it just had to be taken on. So we had a go.
Obviously, because it was Peter, we had a real feeling for the job anyway, and it became a real mission to get it done. So there was a lot of emotional creativity from that point of view, but there's also a lot of technical. There's a lot of taking the image, making sure it's right, making sure it's printing okay, and that sort of thing, yeah.
It's retaining the work as it was made, and our role is to replicate that on a huge scale, probably the biggest scale that's ever been done for a fine art piece of work, printing,
I thought the directors of Nimbus were very, very supportive, because they really thought the project had ended. But they kept the grant going for another 3 months. I think it wasn't so much a creative grant then, it was a compassionate grant, really. I think they had, through my grief, a lot to have that focus. I think it's a very healing path to take.
And I think he would have been very excited to see how this is looking now.
Yes.
And our role, Jane and I, is to make sure that the integrity of each of these marks is retained in the next stage when we print it out. Tradition in art is that artists have always used technology. If you go back to 1480 or something, Dürer used a ray tracing system where it could project an image onto a canvas. 1500 or so, Vermeer built a room behind a scene and sat in the back and projected it and painted it meticulously. So I'd say that artists have always used technology because it opens up new doors, and you never know which way that door's going to go. And I think that's exactly what it's all about. So it's not cheating; it's pushing the medium, and I think that's what an artist's role is to find out what wasn't known before and present the world with something that's new or something that moves on. No good just doing the same old paintings. We need to get out there and do something different.
Even with modern printers, it took Jane and David days of meticulous work to print and then mount the high-quality pictures.
That looks like that fits there.
But how would the directors at Nimbus, who initially commissioned the works, react when the prints were hung?
They went up over a period of about 5 or 6 days, one painting a day. And I remember walking in after they'd hung the first 2 paintings, and my immediate reaction, and I think probably that of several of my colleagues, was, maybe this is going to work and maybe it isn't going to work. And it wasn't until the cumulative effect of all 6 paintings was there that we realised how wonderful it was going to be. And I suppose that's not something which one should be in any doubt, really, that Peter had a cumulative vision for these paintings. But it was a very marked difference. With 1 or 2 paintings, it didn't work. With all 6 of them, absolutely wonderful.
I know I'm Pete's wife, and I'll always think that what he does is wonderful, but I was prepared to be critical. And then when I saw them properly hung and properly lit, all together, as they were designed to be, I was just knocked backwards. I mean, it really was a moment of being dumbstruck.
To me, this whole project is an embodiment of what being a painter was about, what being a composer is about. In musical terms, one of the things you're trying to do is to make colour on the piano. You've tried to make that colour as you compose. And that's one of the things that Peter and I always talked about. Peter was able to conceive of the relationship between visual images and musical images. And he thought of the whole thing as creating an atmosphere which was meant to help people in listening. So when I was playing today, which was the first time I've played the piano in here since the murals have been put up, through the corner of my eye I could see the way the colour moves. Moving, let's say, from something you could just about still imagine to be, let's say, trees or bushes or a fully radiant world of nature, into looking at something very specific in greater detail. And he saw that as a parallel to the process of what happens in music, that music moves in time. You move through something towards something, and so he did that on the walls. And by the end of it, you've actually forgotten that the paintings are there in their own individual right, because they have now seeped into your consciousness enough. They make that world around you, and when the lights go up, you suddenly realize that you can go back into them and see new things and new perspectives. So it's a wonderful experience.
As long as people are there to look at it and are interested in looking at it, then this work is going to get its own energy, its own vitality, which is totally separate from my intention in the first place. It carries on. It's a continuation that's marvellous. You know, these are, in a sense, this is the magic, in a sense, of good art, isn't it? We all hope that sometime in our lives we may do a painting or two, even if we're lucky, that can do that.
I've always been interested in the creative process and never really felt myself part of that. But looking back, I can see that it's been an inspiration for me. And it's wonderful to be part of enabling something to be manifested for lots of other people to see and experience, and hopefully continue to do so. I think it's a very, very fitting epitaph.